Can Islamic eschatology be harmonized with biblical eschatology? Occupying Till He Comes at Southwest Prophecy Ministries. Welcome, friends. This is David Schnitker, your host for today's program. Thank you for joining us. Just a reminder that these programs are supported by your gifts to this ministry. If you would like to contribute to this ongoing faith ministry, which deals with Bible prophecy and current events, simply go to our website to contribute. Our website address is www.swpm.us. You will find a donate link on the homepage. The website address again is www.swpm.us. Thank you for your prayers and support for this faith ministry. As you know, biblical eschatology, or last things, is one of the major focuses of this ministry. Well, today we're going to be looking at Islamic eschatology. In other words, what the Islamic faith teaches about the last days or future events. I think you'll find this to be a very fascinating subject. Well, I'm joined by an expert on this subject. It is a great privilege to have Jeremiah Cry on the program today to discuss his brand new April Last Days Beacon article entitled Harmonizing Islamic Eschatology with Biblical Eschatology. If you would like extra copies of this particular article, I will share how you can obtain that at the end of today's program. Because of Jeremiah's contacts in the Middle East, he will remain off camera during today's program. Well, I've had the joy of having Jeremiah as a student in some seminary classes I taught some years ago. Jeremiah has a heart for Islamic evangelism. He is a Lebanese Christian raised in Beirut during the violent 1980s. We have maintained our friendship, and it is a real joy to welcome Jeremiah to our show today. So welcome, Jeremiah, to our program today.
Hey, thank you for having me on the show.
Well, it's a delight to have you, and you have a very interesting article that you've written. A lot of research has gone into this, and we want to be able to share that with our listeners and our viewers today. So let's begin, Jeremiah, with tell our listeners about your interest in Islamic evangelism and what motivated you to study this very interesting subject of Islamic eschatology.
Well, as you mentioned, I grew up in the Middle East, all around Muslims. Unfortunately, we were so close to them physically, but yet we had nothing in common. And they, in a way, they were the enemy. But then, as I grew up and I came to know the Lord, my heart changed, and I wanted to get to know more about those people and wanted to relate to them. We were physically miles apart, yet we're lots of gap between us from a culture, from the way we think, from all of that. So when I accepted Christ, I felt the desire to go back and reach out to my own people. So we started studying to relate to them. I started studying the way they think, the theology. I read the Quran, did a lot of studying in the Hadith. And, one of the things that I was always fascinated by is the end time, we call eschatology, the study of the end times. And just like I was fascinated in studying in the Bible, I figured there's got to be something there in Islam. And lo and behold, I was very surprised what I found out. And that what took me in this path of doing more and more research. And I found some interesting compatibility, if you want to call it, or harmony that goes between the two.
I think most Western Christians, at least speaking for myself, have maybe a rudimentary understanding of the Islamic faith. We do understand that it is a monotheistic faith and that they have a regard for Abraham and Moses, for example. But in terms of this idea of Islamic eschatology, I must admit that prior to reading your article, I was woefully ignorant in terms of any kinds of specifics, and I think perhaps many Western Christians are in the same condition. Many of us in the West are intrigued by biblical eschatology and have this sense that we are perhaps in the last days and the Bible prophecy is being fulfilled today. But in terms of the Muslim faith, at least speaking for myself, we just really don't have a clue as to what the Islamic faith teaches about the future, or perhaps in terms of the day in which we live. So we want to at least introduce our listeners to that intriguing subject today and hopefully motivate them to get your articles so they can dig in a little bit deeper. But in your paper, you do honestly talk about the fact that there are some difficulties in studying Islamic eschatology, which of course would be true in terms of biblical eschatology, which is why so many people studiously avoid that because of the difficulties. And likewise in your paper you articulate that there are some difficulties in studying and understanding Islamic eschatology. Could you give us some ideas about that?
Absolutely. In fact, just like what you said, even studying eschatology from a pure biblical perspective, you can imagine all the different positions and the pre and post about every single event and,
yes,
and all the passages and different interpretations of those passages. Well, obviously the same stuff applies on the Islamic side of things. But it's even worse in a way because, number one, believe it or not, the Quran is pretty quiet on this topic. And this is not just about this topic. In general, most Islamic theology does not come from Quran anyway, right? A lot of the Islamic theology comes from what we call the hadith, which are stories about the Prophet Muhammad and those who were close to him. And some hadith is more strong than other, depending on where it came from and how many people are between those who told that story are linked to the Prophet. So right there you have thousands and thousands of stories, and many of them contradict each other.
So would the hadith in some ways have similarities to the Gospels, the different Gospel accounts about the life of Jesus?
If you want to consider it that way, except the Gospels is the Gospel is God's Word, whereas the hadiths are not necessarily.
But they're eyewitness accounts, at least
Absolutely.
alleged eyewitness accounts of the life of the Prophet Muhammad.
Yep. And just like how Matthew, Luke, and John, they were close to Jesus, they're with him, they saw these things. The hadiths usually have, a link of who said this and who repeated it all the way down to Muhammad. And the longer that link is, the weaker the hadith is, and the stronger it is. If it's Aisha, for instance, his first wife, one of his wives, obviously the hadith is a lot more value to it.
Okay.
But most of the Islamic theology indeed comes from hadith, not so much from the Quran. So that's one of the problems. One of the fact that makes it a little bit hard to really understand. However, I have to say that the Quran is very clear about the hour of judgment. It's definitely verses in there. To Allah belongs the dominion of the heavens and the earth, and the day of that hour of judgment is established. There's a lot of hour of judgment. It's all over the Quran. We used to deny the day of judgment until there came to us the hour that is certain. So there's a lot of emphasis on there is an end. There is an hour that's going to come that's coming from the Quran.
Okay. Anything else you want to say in terms of the difficulties in studying Islamic eschatology?
I think I pointed to that a little bit. The fact that there's a different, Islam's there's not one way of interpreting things, and different scholars have different opinions.
Oh, okay.
In addition to the fact that the actual material itself is complicated, so you have different, ways of interpreting them, depending, whether you're Sunni or Shia, or even within the Sunni sects, you have all different ideas.
Okay, all right. And again, that sounds very similar to the controversies within biblical eschatology. It's hard to get two scholars that agree on the same thing about it. So in that sense, there's some similarity. One thing about eschatology that is difficult is because it's dealing with things that have not yet happened. And so none of us have a totally clear picture of things that haven't happened. The Bible gives clues. And obviously, the holy books of the Muslim faith give us clues. They speak perhaps in generalities, the hour of judgment. Maybe they don't give all the details and define exactly what that looks like. But there is a similarity in that it is talking about a future time of judgment, and that's certainly one of the themes of biblical eschatology as well, that there's a time of judgment. The day of the Lord is coming.
Exactly.
So there's some similarities there. Well, let me ask this, Jeremiah. Why should we as Christians care about Islamic eschatology?
Well, that's a good question. First of all, I got to mention that it's unlike Christianity, where you cater and care about the individual. All right. Islam is more about the macro, the masses. It's more about dominion, if you want. So whereas Christians reach out to the individual person to come to know Christ, Islam is reaching out to the next generation. It's more about the subdued, the following, as opposed to the internal. It's an external thing. All right. So that's kind of the first thing that someone has to think about. Also, the topic, unlike Christians, where we all know, it's going to end somehow, whether you believe in Amil or post-mill or all that's kind of different things, that's going to happen, but it's in the back of our mind. Just like what I mentioned a minute ago, it's extremely emphasized in the Quran that the judgment is coming, and it's actually, unlike Christians, it's kind of on the back in our mind. For Muslims, it's usually at the forefront of their mind. And that's what it's constantly living every day in fear of that judgment, that one day I'm going to be judged.
So it's not a blessed hope necessarily, or a comforting hope like the Christian hope.
And this is
something that brings fear and...
Yep, it has to do with it. Because us, when you're Christian, you're saved, you're saved, you're saved, right? Whereas on the other hand, when you're not quite sure that you are saved, it's always on the forefront about the judgment, about the end days.
Okay, so there's a dread that's attached to the hour of judgment for a Muslim person. Okay.
And then, of course, we all know Islam is on the rise. There's more than 1.2 billion Muslims on the earth. They're practically in every country in the world, almost, and every city you name, they're Muslims.
Yes.
And again, the idea behind Islam is not about the individual, but rather how one day the entire earth will be Muslim.
Is it one of the key concepts of the Islamic faith is submission?
Absolutely.
And it does have to do with dominion, conquest. The emphasis is on the masses as opposed to the individual. So it's more of a militant sort of religion than the Christian faith. Yeah,
well, yes, absolutely. We all, seen the news and we've seen the militant side of Islam. But even some Christians wrongfully assume that we're in competition, but we're not in reality. Again, I keep saying, we care about the individual. We want, and we're not terribly worried about what's going to happen to the world, even though we know the Lord is going to come and take us and be with Him. Where in Islam, it's all about the earth. It's about the here. It's about the dominion of this earth. It's about turning Islam the dominant.
So it's not a heavenly hope, which is of course the hope of the believer, being with Christ in heaven forever in the new heavens. So the objective of the Islamic faith is an earthly dominion. Earthly objective.
Yes, it's for the earth, but on the visual level, we know that there's a judgment and there is hell. But there's no guarantee that I'm going to be avoiding hell.
Within the Islamic faith.
Even as a Muslim.
Okay. Well, friends, if you've just tuned in, we are interviewing Jeremiah Cry regarding his brand new article entitled Harmonizing Islamic Eschatology with Biblical Eschatology. We've been asking some good questions about the program, about that article. We're going to pick up and ask the next one. What are some of the minor and major signs in Islamic eschatology? Major and minor signs.
All right. Well, and again, in parallel with Christianity, there's some minor and major signs. It happens that are mentioned in Islamic books and Islamic liturgy. For instance, I'm going to just name a few. Increased ignorance, that's one of them. Rise of alcohol and consumption, illegal sexual intercourse. And by the way, if you read the article, all of those references will be in there instead of me telling you which exact book to what exact surah and all that stuff. Apostasy, that's one of them. Frequent earthquakes, spread of plagues, coronavirus. Women outnumber men. Unqualified people assume leadership. That's another one. All kinds of different false prophets showing up, wars between multiple groups, so on.
Sounds like the Olivet Discourse to me.
There's a lot of similarities.
Some real parallels,
There's
aren't
a lot
there?
of similarities
Interesting.
between the two. Some hadiths, shows, some of these things that I mentioned. But those numbers can vary. Somewhere between 50 and 100, depending on what you look at and how you count them.
Oh, okay.
But as the list I just read to you or mentioned to you is indeed very, very similar to what the Bible talks about.
Now, the description you've given, does that kind of categorize both major and minor signs? Is that kind of the big picture?
These are more like the minor
okay.
signs that you might be seeing.
All right.
Then we can talk a little bit more about the different personalities in a minute. But some of these signs, like for instance, again, just like Christianity, a lot of Muslims explain these things metaphorically. For instance, when they say the rising of the sun from the west, what does that mean? Well, some Muslim scholars have said Islam is going to appear in the West, is going to bloom in the West.
Oh, like the Western world, the United States, Western Europe, etc.
So that will be a fulfillment of that sun.
Okay.
And you got others who are a lot more literal. They say, no, the sun is going to rise from the West.
Oh, okay.
So again, a lot of interpretations.
So there are interpretive differences, just like in Christianity. There are those who have a more literal understanding.
You got it.
And then others who have more of a metaphorical understanding. So there's not a monolithic interpretation of these issues.
No. But there are some things that we need to talk about which are make them specifically unique, which I call the major ones.
Okay. So are we ready to talk about personalities? Because there are some important personalities in Islamic eschatology, which also may give us some parallels with Christian eschatology. So talk to us, Jeremiah, about some of the most important personalities in Islamic eschatology.
Absolutely. And this is where it gets really interesting. So far, there's a lot of similarities, and there's even more similarities in those personalities. So there's mainly three of them. Let's talk about those three. The first one, and I'm sure many have heard this word, is the Mahdi, which means the guided one. Right? Especially those who are always afraid of Iran, always talking about the Mahdi's coming, they're expecting the Mahdi.
Yes.
So he is definitely a leader, a political leader, all right, who is going to show up at the end, and he's going to be the forefront, the one who is actually going to be dominating, owning the Muslim world. Now, as I mentioned, a lot of people, especially those from a Shia background,
which is Iranian? Is that primarily a Shiite nation? Okay.
But this concept is in both. It's not just in the Shia.
Also in the Sunni religion?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So they both believe in that. Now, they kind of have different beliefs if you're Sunni or Shia. Like, where does he come from? For instance, the Shia believe that he's in occultation right now, somewhere in Iran, in Qum area. Whereas the Sunni believe that he's going to be coming from, for instance, from Syria, or showing up in Mecca and stuff like that. So there are some differences, but they both agree that he will be the ruler. There's even saying that he will be ruling 7 years.
How long did you say he would rule?
7 years.
7 years.
Yes.
That's an interesting time period, isn't it?
Exactly. That's another similarity between the two.
Yes.
And he is absolutely expected to be the one who's going to be uniting all Muslims all over the world. Right? He is also going to expected to be conquering Israel. Right?
Interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So he is the guy. Now, there has been, over the years of history, multiple people who've declared themselves to be the Mahdi.
Oh, okay.
So it's someone that's very anticipated, and of course, it turned out to be not the right guy.
So far.
All right. So I just want to read that the last hour would not come unless the Muslims would fight against the Jews, and the Muslims would kill them until the Jews would hide themselves behind a stone or a tree, and a stone or a tree would say, Muslim, or the servant of Allah, there's a Jew behind me, come and kill him. And this is kind of showing a little bit of that war that might be happening between the Jews and the Mahdi and his armies. So that's the Mahdi. Now let's talk about the second personality. The second personality that I find very interesting, it's actually the Prophet Isa, or we call him Jesus in Christianity.
Oh, okay.
So he's a prophet, right? Now, there are some very important things that we need to pick out about this particular personality. All right. First of all, he is a prophet, and you would expect usually the prophet to be the one leading the Muslims in prayer. Except when it comes to the Mahdi, he refuses to lead the prayer in the presence of the Mahdi. Remember, the Mahdi is the political guy. And then Isa is the actual prophet,
the religious
Jesus.
leader.
Exactly.
Okay, the Jesus figure, you might say.
Yes.
The religious
so Isa
leader.
is equivalent of Jesus.
Oh, okay.
So when he rallies, he will rally behind the Mahdi, and he will absolutely help him unite the Muslims under one authority. As we all know, ever since the death of the Prophet Muhammad, Islam was divided into main sects. There's a lot more sects underneath. Then the idea here is he will be able to unite both under the authority of the Mahdi. Another function of Isa, or Jesus, is witnessing to the Jews and the Christians. Can you imagine? All of a sudden, Jesus comes back and he says, I did not die on the cross.
Oh, okay.
How many people who proclaim to be Christians are going to go, I was led astray?
So he's going to proclaim himself as the true Jesus as opposed to the crucified Jewish Jesus.
Exactly.
Okay.
So that's a big function of the awaited.
And he will be contemporary with the Mahdi.
Yes.
He'll be on the scene supporting
Absolutely.
Mahdi.
Yes, that's one of his main roles, is to rally Muslims behind the Mahdi. And of course prove that, hey, the Jesus as we know him in Christianity did not die on the cross.
Okay, all right.
And then, of course, he will also turn around to destroy anyone who still believes in the cross and persecute the Jews. So basically, if you still don't believe me, then,
Then you die.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, that's a rather coercive tactic. So he'll witness to Jews and Christians, basically offering himself as the true Jesus, but those who refuse that offer will be killed.
Persecuted, absolutely.
Okay, all right.
So that's the second personality that I found very interesting because, Christians are expecting to see a Jesus return.
Yes.
And so are the Muslims. So
Okay.
there is a Jesus or Isa that's going to be coming.
So they have a messianic expectation, you could say.
Except the word messianic has a whole different meaning.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
He is a Messiah in Islam, and you ask Muslims, what does Messiah mean? There's no meaning.
Yeah,
it's
not an individual personal savior as in Christianity. Okay.
So we got to the third personality, and that person is the Dajjal. The Dajjal in Arabic means the liar, the deceiver, the guy who makes fake things. He will perform miracles. He claims to be divine, but he's also going to be a Jew.
Oh.
All right. So he will be opposing the Mahdi and Isa.
Okay.
He is believed to be one-eyed, although Hadith is not clear which eye it is not working.
Okay.
But he is the figure that will be opposing those two. And of course, according to Islamic eschatology, that Dajjal, the liar, is going to be the one end up losing, and he's going to be dead. And the Mahdi, of course, is going to take care. In fact, Isa will be the one killing the Dajjal, according to Quranic passage.
Okay.
So those are the three different personalities I thought very important to know, because we do have some three other important personalities in the Bible that kind of somewhat mirror those three.
Do you want to talk about that?
Absolutely, I'd be happy to.
Okay.
All right. So yes, there's a lot of parallel exists between the Bible and Islamic eschatology. So let's talk about these three particular, personalities. As you could imagine, putting one and one together, right? The Mahdi, what we call is the Antichrist. He's the political figure. By the way, the Mahdi and Isa, just for clarity's sake, they match perfectly when you study Revelation 13.
Oh,
the two beasts coming
coming from the sea?
From the sea and from the ground.
Yes.
One of them exists to support the other, right?
Yes.
Now, Isa is a prophet.
Yes.
Except from a biblical perspective, he is a false prophet.
Okay.
So we know of a false prophet that exists in the Bible, right?
Yes.
So that would be the equivalent, and that would be Isa in Islam. So the Mahdi would be the leader, it would be the Antichrist. Jesus, as we know him, as he comes back, he would be, according to Islamic eschatology, the liar, the Dajjal. So these are the three kind of, if you want, parallels between the two faiths.
Two in league against the third.
Yep.
You might say. So the Mahdi and Isa are united and in league together against the Dajjal.
Exactly.
The liar.
And the one thing that is not quite we're in agreement with is that the true Christ is that of the Dajjal is going to be the one that's going to be winning and throwing Isa and the Mahdi in the lake of fire.
Okay. So it's a totally different outcome.
The ending is different.
Okay. So in the Islamic eschatology, the Mahdi and Isa win
Exactly.
over the liar, the Dajjal, and defeat him and bring in the worldwide caliphate, you might say, or Islamic kingdom.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So I just want to talk about the fulfillment of these prophecies. Just a couple of points, if you don't mind.
Yes.
About, now that we made this observation from a, in theory, if you want, and theology.
Yes.
And now let's talk about some things that, if anything, should make us raise an eyebrow. All right. First of all, the Bible emphasizes that the final kingdom will be a divided kingdom. And I've already stated that Islam itself has been divided practically since Muhammad died. So that's the first I'm going to say. Second thing, the kingdom will be different from all other kingdoms and will devour the whole earth and tread it down and crush it. That's Daniel 7:23.
Yes.
Now we all know about Islam and how its explosive growth, especially recently across the entire world, right? Islam, as we all know, and I gotta be clear, Muslims are people. They need Christ. This is nothing against them. It's nothing against the people. It's more about the actual ideology, Islam. And I know some people have a hard time differentiating between the two, right? People need Christ. Ideology is evil.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So Islam is more than a religion. It's a political, economic, social, and military system, all under a religious umbrella. Right. So kind of tying it with Daniel 7 there. Another thing in Daniel 7 says the Antichrist will intend to make alterations in times and in law. This is in Daniel 7:25. Well, guess what? We all know that Islam has its own Sharia law.
Yes.
I mean, you gotta know what Sharia law is, right?
Yes.
It's very different. Even in some Western countries where you have civil law in the country of the land, and some pockets in Europe, even here in the US, you have trying to, whether officially or unofficially implement Sharia law in Muslim communities. And then we also have about the times, right? There's the traditional year that we're in, right?
Yes.
2020, 2021. Well, but you also have the Hijra year, the year of the Islamic year, that if you're a Muslim, you'd be following that times.
Which is a separate calendar.
Exactly, a different calendar. Number 4, the Bible makes reference to the fact that the beast will be fatally wounded. And then we all talk about this kingdom that could be dying. Now, we also know, just in terms of parallelism, we all know that the Ottoman Empire, the caliphate system, has been dismantled for over 100 years.
Yes, it has.
Yeah, and there are efforts right now, Turkey itself, and the current leader of Turkey, to bring it back to its previous glory. So then, something to think about in terms of the parallelism, if you want, or maybe prophecy of the Bible that could be fulfilled if you were to think from
like a fatal wound that's being healed.
Exactly.
At least the intention of the Muslims is to reestablish that Ottoman Empire to dominate the entire Middle East.
Yep. The beast is awakening, in other words, whether through ISIS or through just fundamental Islam. Just look at all the countries in the Middle East, whether it's Egypt or Syria. I mean, if you look back 50 years ago or 60 or 100 years ago, they were nowhere near as fundamentalist as they are right now.
Yes.
So the beast is indeed growing from that perspective. Another thing, in Revelation 24, we talk about the beast, the Christian beast, beheading. Well, who beheads these days?
The Muslims.
Well,
yes, they do.
Islam.
Yeah, Islam. Yeah, right. The Islamic faith.
Exactly.
Yes.
Because again, our enemy is not the Muslims, it's Islam. We love them. I love them.
It's a system.
Yes.
Yeah.
So number 6, and finally, I just want to say, both Sunni and I know we're seeing a lot of peace talk lately.
Yes.
But fundamentally, both Shia and Sunni prescribe the fact that I just said, the Dajjal, who is a Jew, which is again against destroying Israel. So it's just something to think about from an end prophet perspective.
So from a theological perspective, the Islamic faith is unalterably opposed to Judaism. Could we say that? In other words, in their eschatology, the Jadal is a Jew, the liar. And so the hour of judgment also includes judgment upon Israel.
Pretty much, the Jewish people, yes.
The Jewish people. Okay.
Whether it's the current Israel, the future Israel, or, the Jewish in general. Whether there be an interim peace or not, we're talking about eschatology, which is the future.
Okay. Well, great. This has been a wonderful picture. And again, I think fills in the gaps for many of us as Western Christians. We're obviously very immersed in biblical eschatology, and kind of wondering what's going on, how the pieces are going to fit. But it's interesting to see that within the Islamic faith there are many parallels, what I might irreverently call the bizarro world sort of thing, where they have similar characters, perhaps opposite outcomes as opposed to the biblical eschatology, but yet similar characters, etc., that will play an important role in the future. And I think understanding this will help us to get inside the minds of those who are devout Muslims, understanding what their expectations are for the near term. And it might even help us to understand some of the conflicts, both ideological and military, between Muslim people and Jewish people in the Middle East. And why peace is such a, how should we say, a difficult thing to achieve.
Yeah, and some folks, even on the Christian side, that they, after studying what I've studied, they might say, you know what, this is how they interpret the Bible. Islam is indeed the kingdom that's going to come back. And there's some merit to that, whether you prescribe to that philosophy or not.
Yeah, there is a school of thought which we don't have time to develop, is that the Antichrist may be a Muslim. And
based on, obviously, from our perspective, the Bible is the true word of God, and it is the truth, not the Islamic hadith and the Quran. But if you were to harmonize the two, there's definitely a potential conclusion that indeed the Mahdi is indeed the Antichrist, if we were to do the comparison.
Well, as they say, time will tell.
Absolutely.
Speaking of time, we're out of that for today, Jeremiah. Thank you for joining us for today's podcast. And friends, thank you for joining us. We will be offering this excellent article to accompany this interview. Hopefully this will whet your appetite to dig in deeper. A lot of documentation. It actually gets into the text of the Quran and the Hadith. So you can see for yourself the documentation behind this discussion. The article is entitled Harmonizing Islamic Eschatology with Biblical Eschatology. That is our April Last Days Beacon article. And you may order 5 copies for a donation of $5 or 25 copies for a $15 contribution. To do so, just go to our website, www.swpm.us, go to our bookstore, type in the subject. I bet if you type in Islamic Eschatology, it'll take you right to the article. The website again is www.swpm.us. The article is entitled Understanding Islamic Eschatology. And we trust that you will avail yourself of that. It'll help you in your understanding of perhaps Islamic friends or neighbors that you certainly want to reach with the gospel and for Christ. Well, friends, thank you for joining us for today's podcast. I look forward to seeing you next time. Until then, this is your host, David Schnitker. Thanks for listening.